a body under the glow of a flickering gaslight. But who turned down the flame? Welcome to the Via File. I am your host, Victor Harlow. This community is incredible. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Your words bring this mystery to life. I can't wait to read them. Now, let's begin. The Lyceum Theatre held its breath in the amber glow of restored gaslight, each fixture casting trembling shadows across walls that had witnessed 7 decades of theatrical triumph and catastrophe. The ancient building seemed to pulse with anticipation as the final dress rehearsal of Webster's The Duchess of Malfi approached, the Victorian gas flames dancing in their ornate sconces like spirits summoned from the theatre's storied past. A smell of dust, sighs, and the faintest tang of gas threaded through the velvet hush, while somewhere a pulley creaked and a curtain edge murmured against the boards. The stage, great and bare under its working lights, had the chastened look of a place awaiting ceremony, with chairs arranged in funereal groups and a length of green baize draped over the prompt table. Inspector Roderick Alleyn, who had come by invitation of a gentleman connected with the Restoration Committee and whose interest in theatres had been of long standing, sat near the back of the stalls with an air of polite invisibility. His hat rested upon his knees, his long fingers folded over it as he took in the peculiar intimacy of a theatre at rest. He observed with the indulgence of a connoisseur the exposed mechanics half hidden behind great effects, the varnished banisters worn to silk by countless hands, and the hollows worn by long-remembered footsteps. From the wings came the stage manager's unassailable murmur, and presently the prompt bell sounded, light as glass tapped by a ring. Madame Petrova entered the stage light with the quiet certainty of one who had learned to rule by refusing to raise her voice. She was not tall, but the square set of her shoulders and the uncompromising line of her mouth commanded absolute authority. Her accent lent gravity to even the most mundane theatrical instructions as she signaled for the ghost light to be borne away. Gas jets along the tormentor flamed from pin to flower, and the theatre lifted its head. "We shall begin," she declared, and if the Russian edges of her consonants offered themselves as exotic garnish, her intention was perfectly English in its firmness. Sir Nigel Ashworth, costumed for the later scenes in Webster, stood apart and watched with a gentleman's impatience restrained to a tightening of the jaw as junior players found their places. He possessed the kind of good looks that abolished effort and made sincerity superfluous, at least in the eyes of those who wished to be persuaded. A small make-up towel hung immaculate over his shoulder, but his celebrated profile bore an unusual tautness, his eyes darting nervously toward the prompt corner. When Geoffrey Tremaine entered with the wearied punctuality of long practice, Sir Nigel spoke softly. "Confound these lamps." Tremaine's heavy lids did not lift, but his mouth moved in a shape that might have been agreement or parody. From the opposite wing, Rosalind Carey watched them both with a stillness that could have been obedience. The young understudy's profile was clear as a medal, her hair drawn back too tightly for comfort as she observed the quick glance Sir Nigel cast toward Miss Fortescue, the ancient prompter who sat like a saint in her niche. When the stage manager addressed her, "Miss Carey, if you please, stand by for the Duchess's entrance," she stepped back into shadow with the particular economy of movement that belongs to actors, even when quite alone. In the royal box, Lady Constance Fairfax observed the proceedings with serene composure, her gloved hands folded precisely in her lap as she watched her considerable investment take shape upon the boards below. Her presence lent an air of legitimacy that money alone could not purchase, and the company moved with heightened awareness of her scrutiny. A message was brought to her on a small tray, a square envelope of the invitation sort, and she, without glancing at the bearer, laid it beneath her fan with practiced discretion. Alleyn listened for the false notes that share a family resemblance with falsehood itself. He marked Sir Nigel's agitation, Madame Petrova's lack of surprise at the leading man's behavior, and the minute corrections of Miss Fortescue when cues were dropped. A fitter in shirt sleeves passed the orchestra rail with small wrenches on a strap, moving with the cautious tread of one who preferred to remain unnoticed. "Half hour, please," called the stage manager, and the cry, repeated like a litany down corridors and into mirrored rooms, lapped back faintly into the house. At this, a general dispersal took place. Sir Nigel disappeared toward the right, Tremaine toward the left, while the gaslight fixtures flickered once in unison before steadying. Alleyn noted a draught that went round his ankles and set the flames to their capers, carrying with it the faintest trace of something that did not belong to the theatre's usual perfume of dust and grease paint, an acrid sweetness that disturbed the evening's careful orchestration and lingered like a wrong note in the amber-scented air. The corridor behind the Lyceum stage lay in a hush peculiar to theatres, where sound is less an absence than an expectation deferred. Narrow as a passage in an old ship, it ran a length of worn carpet that had accepted innumerable muffled footfalls, while small doors repeated themselves with modest brass nameplates along one wall. 2 gas brackets, restored to their Victorian complacency, murmured softly as their flames made small, intent bows to any draught that ventured from the stage. The air, compounded of grease paint, the faint breath of gas, and something indefinably theatrical, had the ritual, gravity of a vestry combined with the household intimacy of a dressing room. There, in that poised quiet, the scream came. One clear, involuntary sound that seemed not to proceed from any human agency, but to be drawn out of the building itself. It fell to silence with the curious rapidity common to theatres, where a cry is either justified at once or suppressed forever. Alleyn, rising from his place in the stalls, found himself moving with the stage manager who, in such emergencies, assumed a disinterested speed that spoke of long experience with theatrical crises. "Sir Nigel's room," the stage manager said, and although he had spoken to no one in particular, bodies arranged themselves to form a path. Madame Petrova appeared at the head of the passage with the quiet certainty of one accustomed to command, while Lady Constance, visible in the royal box above, remained seated but allowed her fan to fall still in her gloved hands. Sir Nigel's door bore the discreet star that transformed a tradesman's room into a sanctuary. The stage manager rapped once and waited the fraction of a beat that considerations of status demand. Receiving no reply, he set his shoulder against it, meeting a momentary resistance that yielded to reveal a towel that had been placed at the door's base, now fallen open like a discarded sash. The room within, with its mirror surrounded by bulbs that might have illuminated a chapel, was half in shadow under a gas bracket that burned with a queer, dim determination. The smell of coal gas was not strong enough to repel, only to disturb. At the dressing table, Sir Nigel Ashworth sat slumped forward, his hands limp, the celebrated head tipped sideways, so that his face, still partially made up for the later scenes, showed a pale mask under the uneven light. "Turn that off," said the stage manager, but Alleyn forestalled the dresser with a quiet hand. "If you will give me a moment," he said, crossing to examine the latched window and noting a small metal key upon the table, a thing like a toy spanner, which he observed carefully before setting it beside a powder tin. Only then did he lift the window, and in the first draught, the flame on the bracket lifted and danced towards transparency. Dr. Pemberton arrived with the compact authority of his profession, his fingers finding wrist and throat while his eyes traveled quickly over the room's arrangement. "He is beyond help," he announced formally, then addressed Lady Constance, who had now reached the doorway with her usual composed dignity. "My lady, we must clear this room. There is gas, though not in deadly concentration now, and there are peculiarities which I should prefer not to disturb." "Peculiarities?" Lady Constance repeated with a steadiness that did her hereditary composure credit, while behind her, Madame Petrova made a short, unhappy exclamation in which the word accident contended with something darker and was suppressed by neither. Dr. Pemberton's grave face turned towards Alleyn with the air of recognition. "I think we had best send for the yard, Dr. Pemberton," Alleyn said quietly. "Meanwhile, might I suggest that nothing be touched?" The dresser's hands fell obediently to his sides, while the stage manager, who dealt with authority as a condition of employment, merely nodded. In the narrow corridor, the company gathered, figures in various degrees of antique costume who appeared, in their sudden quiet, to be disturbed from a painting. Geoffrey Tremaine came forward until he could see into the room, his large shoulders filling the doorway. He did not speak immediately, but when he did, his words carried an uncomfortable weight. He loved a good effect, did Nigel, even at his own dressing table. The observation fell flat in the corridor's narrow air and remained where it fell. Lady Constance assumed command with the gift of making advice sound like consent. "It will be supposed to be an unfortunate mishap. We will not have a scene. Mr. Cobb, make some explanation about technical difficulties to the remaining audience." When Alleyn had used the telephone in the prompt office, speaking with quiet authority about the necessity for discretion, he returned to find the theatre's population thinned to the essential company. In the foyer, costumed figures sat on gilt chairs along the wall, hands folded, eyes lowered as if in chapel, while the gaslight fixtures continued their eternal dance throughout the building. Standing once more before the dressing table, Alleyn noted the objects of a professional life set out with particular neatness. Cold cream in its dish, a cut-glass water bottle, a comb, a watch. Near the gas key lay an oval of blackened grease upon the linen cover, and the faintest smear of the same upon the inner edge of the gas tap. He lifted his gaze to the mirror and saw superimposed the passage behind him and, barely a movement, the quick settling of shadows as a gas bracket in the corridor flickered and recovered. Somewhere, far away, a door shut with excessive care, and the new quiet had a different quality, as if the theatre, having exhaled its first shock, had now commenced to hold back something that would not be contained. The Lyceum Theatre had settled into that peculiar hush which follows crisis in any well-regulated establishment, where shock absorbs itself into the very fabric of respectability. The gaslight fixtures, restored to their Victorian propriety, burned with steady determination along the corridors, their amber glow transforming the narrow passages into something between a gentleman's club and a chapel. Detective Sergeant Fox stood in the foyer with his customary solidity, notebook held with the reverence of a prayer book, his presence lending an air of methodical comfort to the assembled company. The smell of coal gas had largely dissipated, leaving only the theatre's familiar perfume of dust, size, and old velvet, though beneath it lingered something else, a faint sweetness that seemed to cling to the very walls. Inspector Alleyn moved among the costumed figures with the courtesy of a gentleman who had arrived at an inconvenient moment and wished to impose as little as possible upon their distress. His examination of Sir Nigel's dressing room had revealed details that spoke less of accident than of careful preparation. The small metal key, found beside the powder tin, bore fresh scratches that suggested recent use, while the gas tap itself showed traces of grease applied with deliberate precision. Mr. Briggs, the theatre's head gas man, had provided information of considerable significance when summoned to explain the restored system's operation. That bracket in Sir Nigel's room, Inspector, no fault with the installation itself, Briggs had explained, his weathered hands demonstrating the mechanism with professional pride. But somebody's been at the head connection. Fresh grease on the gland, and that's not my work. We keep our keys numbered and locked away proper. He had produced a small spanner, clean to recent polishing. "This isn't one of ours, sir. Our tools are marked and accounted for." The missing key, number 4 from the locked cabinet, had created a small stir among the technical staff, though Briggs maintained with touching faith that such things were often mislaid. Alleyn had noted the information with his characteristic courtesy, while observing that the theater's gas system required intimate knowledge to manipulate safely, knowledge that extended beyond the casual familiarity of most theatrical personnel. Lady Constance Fairfax received his attention in a small anteroom off the royal box, where she sat with the composure that her breeding demanded, though her gloved fingers showed the faintest tremor as she adjusted her evening cloak. "Inspector, this is a most distressing business," she said, her voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to being deferred to in matters of public concern. Sir Nigel had been experiencing certain difficulties of late. Financial pressures, I believe, though one hesitates to discuss such matters. He had approached me regarding an advance against future earnings. "Indeed, your ladyship." Alleyn replied with gentle formality. "Might I ask when you last observed Sir Nigel's demeanour? I understand he had seemed troubled recently." Her response came with the reluctance of one who finds such discussions distasteful. He had become increasingly nervous, speaking of enemies and conspiracies. One attributed it to the natural anxiety that precedes opening night, but now. She paused, her gaze moving briefly toward the corridor that led to the dressing rooms. "The gaslight restoration was my suggestion, Inspector. Historical accuracy being a point upon which I am, perhaps, too exacting." Madame Petrova, when approached near the prompt corner, spoke with the measured intensity that characterized her direction. Sir Nigel was not a man to make careless errors. With gas taps, Inspector. He was methodical, precise in all his preparations, but he had become haunted. Yes, speaking of persons who wished him ill, of rivals who would see him destroyed. Her accent lent gravity to observations that might otherwise have seemed merely theatrical. In recent weeks, he watched the corners, feared the shadows. He hated these restored lamps, said they made him feel observed. The technical staff's testimony revealed the complexity of the gaslight system, which required specific knowledge to operate safely. The head engineer, Mr. Finch, explained with professional precision how the network of pipes and valves demanded not merely mechanical aptitude, but intimate understanding of the Lyceum's particular installation. "It's not simply a matter of turning a tap, sir. There's the main valve, the individual room controls, the pressure regulators. One must know precisely what one is about." As the evening progressed, Alleyn found himself increasingly aware of the theater's peculiar acoustics, which seemed to carry whispered conversations from unexpected quarters while muffling others entirely. Geoffrey Tremaine, when questioned about his observations of Sir Nigel's recent behavior, spoke with the measured delivery of one who had spent decades projecting to the gallery. Sir Nigel had enemies, Inspector, as any successful man must. But he also possessed secrets, and in my experience, secrets prove far more dangerous than enemies. They require constant vigilance to maintain. Returning to the dressing room for a final examination, Alleyn stood before the mirror where Sir Nigel had met his end, noting how the reflection captured not only the room's contents, but also the corridor beyond. In the uncertain gaslight, he realized observation and performance became indistinguishable. The careful arrangement of objects, the precisely positioned towel, the theatrical timing of the death itself, all suggested a murderer who understood both the mechanics of the theater and the psychology of its inhabitants. As he prepared to leave, the gas flames along the passage gave a single, concerted flutter, recovered, then wavered again as if some distant hand had tested a valve. In the silence that followed, Alleyn heard the faintest sound from below, the soft closing of a door executed with excessive care. The new quiet had a different quality, as if the theatre, having exhaled its first shock, had now commenced to conceal something that would not long remain hidden. The wings of the Lyceum Theatre, which by daylight appeared merely as narrow avenues of rope and timber, had by evening transformed into a series of veiled chambers where shadows gathered with particular intensity. Each space was defined by drifting canvas and the pale rectangles of set pieces that leaned like courteous giants awaiting their cues. while the restored gas brackets cast their amber light over costumes hanging in patient rows along the walls. The air carried the accumulated scent of decades, dust and size, grease paint and that faint sweetness which had begun to permeate the building since Sir Nigel's death. Detective Sergeant Fox stood with his customary solidity near the prompt corner, notebook held with reverent precision, while Inspector Alleyn examined a leather portfolio that had been discovered among the deceased actor's personal effects. The portfolio's contents proved illuminating in ways that cast the evening's tragedy in an entirely different light. Among the usual theatrical detritus, press cuttings, contracts, and correspondence with agents, lay a collection of unsigned letters that spoke to darker preoccupations. The handwriting varied, suggesting multiple authors or deliberate disguise, but the tone remained consistent throughout. Veiled threats couched in language that might have passed for mere professional commentary, yet carried unmistakable menace. Most disturbing were the quotations from Webster's plays, copied with scholarly precision and applied with surgical accuracy to Sir Nigel's circumstances. "Cover her face. Mine eyes dazzle," read one, while another bore the chilling observation that other sins only speak. "Murder shrieks out." Rosalind Carey entered the wings with the controlled grace of one who had learned to navigate hostile territory without betraying weakness. Her costume from the earlier scenes lent her an air of tragic dignity that seemed entirely appropriate to the circumstances, though Alleyn noted how she chose to position herself where the gaslight would cast her face in partial shadow. When he invited her to speak freely about her relationship with Sir Nigel, her response came with the careful modulation of one who had rehearsed difficult speeches. "Sir Nigel was generous with his guidance, Inspector," she began, her voice carrying undertones of carefully controlled bitterness. "He understood the challenges facing young actresses in London, or so I believed." Her pause carried the weight of disillusionment. "Our professional relationship developed into something more personal, though I fear his promises of advancement were never seriously intended. When I pressed him to honor his commitments regarding my career, he grew cold, distant. He said there were persons who would use any indiscretion against him, that he could not afford to be seen as showing favoritism." The revelation fell into the wing's amber-lit silence with particular weight. Alleyn observed how her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, though her voice remained steady. He had grown increasingly paranoid in recent weeks. Speaking of enemies who sought to destroy him, "Anonymous letters," he said, though he would never show them to me. I believed his rejection of my professional aspirations stemmed from this fear, but now I wonder if there were other considerations. Geoffrey Tremaine's entrance commanded attention through sheer presence rather than announcement. His costume, the cardinal's robes, from Webster's play, seemed to transform him into a figure of ecclesiastical judgment, though his manner remained that of a gentleman addressing social equals. He acknowledged Alleyn with the courtesy due to established authority, while his glance toward Miss Carey carried undertones that spoke of long-standing professional tensions. "Inspector," Tremaine said, settling himself with the deliberation of age and dignity, "I trust Miss Carey has been forthcoming about her particular circumstances. The theatre is a small world, and certain relationships inevitably attract attention, particularly when they involve questions of artistic merit and personal advancement." His tone suggested layers of meaning that invited further inquiry. When pressed about Sir Nigel's recent state of mind, Tremaine's response revealed the careful judgment of one who had survived theatrical politics through discretion. Sir Nigel had become obsessed with the notion that someone was systematically undermining his position. He spoke frequently of past indiscretions being used against him, matters from years ago that he believed had been forgotten. There was an incident many years past involving a promising young actress named Eleanor Vance. Her career ended abruptly after what was whispered to be an unfortunate association with Sir Nigel. The matter was never publicly aired, but those with long memories in the profession recalled it well. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Whitmore, the theatre's elderly wardrobe mistress, whose 40 years of service had made her privy to secrets that others preferred forgotten. She carried herself with the dignity of one whose position, though humble, commanded respect through long and faithful service, and her sharp eyes held the accumulated wisdom of decades spent observing theatrical humanity. "Begging your pardon, Inspector," she said, her voice carrying the authority of accurate observation, "but there's something you ought to know about recent weeks. Sir Nigel had taken to visiting my workroom frequently, asking questions about the gaslight fixtures that seemed most unusual for an actor. He wanted to know about the pressure systems, how the jets were cleaned, whether the old keys still functioned. Most peculiar interest for a gentleman who'd never concerned himself with technical matters." Her testimony continued with the precision of one accustomed to noticing details others missed. "I've seen someone moving through the corridors after hours, carrying what appeared to be tools. Couldn't make out who it was. The gaslight creates such shadows, but they moved with knowledge of the building, avoiding the boards that creak. And there's been paper about, Inspector. Anonymous notes pinned to costume rails, tucked into gloves. Lines from Webster mostly, copied from old programs with a hand that knew the theatre well." Mrs. Whitmore produced a small collection of these theatrical fragments, each bearing quotations that seemed chosen for their psychological impact rather than their literary merit. The paper itself was of good quality, the handwriting educated, suggesting an author of some refinement who understood both the plays and their intended victims' vulnerabilities. As she spoke, the gas flames in their brackets gave a sudden flutter, as if responding to some distant disturbance in the building's circulation. In the momentary dimming, the shadows seemed to shift and gather, and Alleyn found himself acutely aware of the theatre's capacity for concealment. The investigation had revealed a pattern of systematic intimidation extending over weeks, conducted by someone with intimate knowledge of both the building's technical systems and Sir Nigel's psychological weaknesses. When Mrs. Whitmore withdrew to her domain among the costumes, Alleyn stood in the wing's amber-lit silence and considered the evening's revelations. The anonymous letters, the mysterious figure with tools, the careful psychological campaign all suggested a murderer who possessed not only technical expertise, but also a profound understanding of theatrical psychology. Someone had been preparing this drama with the same attention to detail that characterized the finest stage productions, using the restored gaslight fixtures not merely as murder weapons, but as instruments of terror designed to isolate and torment their victim before delivering the final, fatal performance. The gas flames along the wall gave another flutter, and in the brief dimming that followed, Alleyn heard the faintest sound from the sub-stage areas below. A door closing with excessive care, executed with the timing of one who understood that even the smallest sound carries far in a theatre's listening silence. The new quiet had a different quality, as if the building itself had drawn breath and now waited, with theatrical patience, for the next act to begin. The prompt corner of the Lyceum Theatre occupied a space no larger than a confessional, folded into the stage-left wing like a hermit's cell where theatrical memory had accumulated for decades. Miss Adelaide Fortescue presided over this sanctuary with the quiet authority of one who had served as keeper of the theatre's secrets for 40 years, her small desk bearing the patina of long service beneath shelves, groaning under prompt books that chronicled the Lyceum's golden age. A single gas bracket cast its amber glow over pages that documented countless productions, while the air carried the accumulated scent of old paper, dust, and that peculiar sweetness which seemed to have permeated the building since Sir Nigel's death. Detective Sergeant Fox stood respectfully by the narrow entrance, his solid presence providing reassuring normalcy in this repository of theatrical history. Inspector Alleyn approached with the reverence due to an oracle, settling himself on a worn three-legged stool as Miss Fortescue arranged her materials with archival precision. Her grey hair, drawn back in a style unchanged for 30 years, framed sharp eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of one who had observed human nature from the unique vantage point of the prompt corner. "Inspector," she began, her voice carrying the clear projection that years of prompting had developed, "I've maintained records beyond the usual theatrical notations. Sir Nigel had been receiving correspondence of a most disturbing nature." The leather-bound ledger she produced revealed her methodical documentation of a campaign that had extended over several weeks. Anonymous letters, delivered through various means and always containing quotations from Webster's plays, had been systematically targeting Sir Nigel with psychological precision. "The messages were chosen with particular malice," Miss Fortescue explained, turning to carefully dated entries. "Cover her face. Mine eyes dazzle" appeared repeatedly, always in reference to a matter from years past involving a young actress named Eleanor Vance. At this name, her expression grew grave as she retrieved a manila folder bearing the notation 1923 Personal Files. The photographs within revealed a young woman of ethereal beauty whose promising career had ended with shocking suddenness. "Miss Vance was to have been our Duchess that season," Miss Fortescue continued, her voice carrying the weight of old tragedy. "She formed an attachment to Sir Nigel and discovered certain aspects of his character that did not match his public reputation. When she threatened to make her knowledge public, she found herself the victim of a campaign remarkably similar to what Sir Nigel recently endured. The documentation revealed systematic intimidation, anonymous letters questioning Eleanor Vance's moral character, tampered costumes, and a series of small accidents that collectively created an atmosphere of menace. Her final performance had been marked by a deliberate failure of the Gaslight system that left her alone on stage in humiliating darkness. She never recovered her confidence," Miss Fortescue said quietly. "She maintained correspondence with me until her death 5 years ago, speaking often of justice deferred and debts unpaid." The investigation took a more immediate turn as Miss Fortescue described recent observations. "About a fortnight ago, I witnessed someone in Sir Nigel's dressing room tampering with the gas bracket. The figure moved with knowledge of the building, slipping away through the service passages when I cleared my throat. After that incident, Sir Nigel began complaining of a faint smell of gas, even when his light was extinguished." Her records revealed that the threatening communications had extended beyond Sir Nigel to other company members. Little notes tucked into costumes and left on makeup trays had created an atmosphere of unease throughout the production. To Rosalind, Carey came warnings about ambition. To Geoffrey Tremaine, references to old sins casting shadows. To Madame Petrova, hints about the weight of the past. "Someone was enjoying this grim performance," Miss Fortescue observed, "using their knowledge of theatrical psychology to set people against one another." Detective Sergeant Fox entered with apologetic care, carrying evidence discovered in the sub-stage area. "Letters and what appears to be a journal, sir," he reported quietly, "hidden behind the old calcium light equipment." The handwriting, as Miss Fortescue immediately noted, belonged to someone educated in an earlier generation, when penmanship was considered an essential accomplishment. As they prepared to leave, the gas bracket above Miss Fortescue's desk gave a sudden flutter, its flame bending in response to some disturbance in the building's circulation. In the momentary dimming, Alleyn heard what sounded like careful footsteps in the corridor above, moving with the precision of one who knew which boards would creak. The new silence that followed had a different quality, as if the theatre itself had drawn breath and now waited, with the patience of centuries, for the final act to commence. The investigation had revealed not merely a murder, but a carefully orchestrated drama that used the theatre's own restored Gaslight system as both weapon and symbol, transforming Sir Nigel's final weeks into a prolonged performance of psychological terror that culminated in his meticulously staged death. The morning light filtering through the Lyceum Theatre's tall windows possessed the quality of revelation, stripping away the amber romance of Gaslight to expose details that evening had mercifully concealed. The restored Victorian fixtures stood silent in their brackets, their brass fittings gleaming with the peculiar innocence that belongs to objects divorced from their sinister purposes, while the great auditorium held the hushed expectancy of a courtroom awaiting verdict. Inspector Alleyn sat in the manager's cramped office, surrounded by documents that Detective Sergeant Fox had arranged with methodical precision across the green baize table. Each manila folder representing another layer of deception peeled away from what had initially appeared to be a straightforward case of accidental death. The air, though scrubbed clean of the previous night's coal gas, still carried the theatre's familiar perfume of dust and old velvet, now tinged with that indefinable sweetness that had begun to permeate the building since Sir Nigel's demise. The investigation had taken a more technical turn with the arrival of the gas system blueprints, rolled drawings that Mr. Finch, the head engineer, spread across the desk with the reverence due to sacred texts. "You see, Inspector," he explained, his pointer moving with precision along the inked lines, "the restoration was insisted upon with particular exactitude. Manual taps throughout, no modern safety devices. The patron was most specific about maintaining period authenticity." Against one margin, Alleyn noted, a neat pencil had marked a small cross beside the line feeding Sir Nigel's dressing room, accompanied by a notation in an educated hand. "As per 1895 plan, no automatic check." The initials beneath, lightly inscribed, appeared to be CF, though the second letter seemed deliberately obscured. Lady Constance Fairfax received him in the royal box with her customary composure, though the morning light revealed subtle signs of strain that evening's gaslight had previously concealed. Her correspondence with the engineers, when delicately broached, showed a vigorous interest in technical particulars that seemed unusual for a patron typically concerned with artistic rather than mechanical matters. "Inspector," she said, her voice maintaining its aristocratic authority, "if one is to underwrite an enterprise, one should understand what one supports. The Lyceum's character is intimately connected with its atmosphere. Gaslight provides not merely illumination, but authenticity." Her explanation, delivered with perfect courtesy, nonetheless carried undertones that suggested deeper motivations than mere historical accuracy. Geoffrey Tremaine, encountered in the green room where morning light revealed the careful construction of his distinguished persona, spoke with the measured delivery that had served him well through decades of theatrical politics. When the conversation turned to Eleanor Vance, his composure showed the faintest crack, like a hairline fissure in fine porcelain. "A tragic talent," he observed, his voice acquiring a distant quality. Her career ended rather abruptly. There were whispers, as there always are in this profession. Sir Nigel claimed to have merely offered guidance, but the general consensus was that he had discouraged her ambitions in a rather definitive fashion. The emphasis on "discouraged" conveyed worlds of unspoken cruelty while maintaining the surface courtesy that characterized their social circle. Mrs. Whitmore, consulted once again in her domain among the costumes, provided observations that cast the recent weeks in an increasingly sinister light. Sir Nigel had been asking peculiar questions about the gas system, she reported, her needle flashing through a length of brocade with practiced efficiency. Not just about the fixtures in his room, but about the entire network. How the pressure worked, whether the old mechanisms could be made to misbehave. Most unusual interest for a gentleman who'd never concerned himself with technical matters. Her sharp eyes, accustomed to detecting the smallest flaw in a garment, had also noted others taking uncommon interest in the theatre's hidden workings, gathering knowledge systematically as if preparing for an elaborate piece of stagecraft. Among Sir Nigel's effects, a leather-bound diary revealed the mounting anxieties that had plagued his final weeks. The entries, though brief and often cryptic, spoke of increasing paranoia, veiled threats, and a growing sense of being watched. References to the old business and debts of the past appeared repeatedly, along with desperate attempts to secure loans and casual mentions of individuals who held power over his reputation. The diary painted a picture of a man trapped by his own history, blackmailed not merely for money, but for the carefully constructed facade behind which he had conducted his professional life. Rosalind Carey, found in the green room turning a small silver locket in her fingers, finally revealed the true complexity of her relationship with Sir Nigel. "He promised me advancement, Inspector," she said with quiet dignity, "claimed to see in me the true essence of the Duchess, but when I pressed him to honor his commitments, he became evasive, speaking of risks and old scandals that could resurface. He implied that helping me would expose him to certain vulnerabilities." Her words suggested a man desperately clinging to his reputation, willing to sacrifice others to protect the secrets upon which his career had been built. As the morning progressed, Alleyn found himself constructing a picture of systematic preparation extending over weeks, involving not merely the manipulation of gas fixtures, but a comprehensive campaign of psychological warfare designed to isolate Sir Nigel and create conditions where his death would appear accidental. The restored Gaslight system had been chosen not for its historical authenticity, but for its capacity to deliver death in a manner that would initially escape detection, requiring intimate knowledge to operate safely, yet appearing harmless to cursory examination. The technical evidence supported a conspiracy of considerable sophistication, one that exploited both the theater's unique environment and the psychological vulnerabilities of its inhabitants. Someone had been gathering knowledge systematically about gas pressures, about individual weaknesses, about the building's hidden passages and forgotten mechanisms. The gaslight fixtures, restored with such care to their Victorian splendor, had become instruments not merely of illumination, but of a justice that operated outside conventional law. As Alleyn prepared to leave the manager's office, the gas flames along the corridor outside gave a sudden, concerted flutter before recovering their steady burn. Somewhere in the building's depths, a door closed with excessive care, and the theater resumed its composure with the slightest emphasis, as if signaling a change of scene for those who knew how to read its subtle language. The investigation had revealed not merely a murder, but a drama staged with theatrical precision, where the distinction between performance and reality had dissolved entirely, leaving only the flickering flames to bear witness to secrets that daylight could illuminate but not fully expose. The auditorium had been arranged as if for a private ceremony. The house darkened to a dusky amber that allowed the restored gas brackets to perform their discreet offices along the walls. The ghost light stood sentinel at center stage, its fragile flame conferring the odd impression that the theater itself kept watch over its inhabitants. Dust, disturbed by quiet movement, drifted in faint veils across the orchestra pit, while from the high gallery came the occasional soft settling of timber as the building acknowledged the hour. Inspector Alleyn, seated at the end of the front row, possessed the composed air of a host at an uncomfortable dinner, while Detective Sergeant Fox occupied a position near the aisle with his respectful solidity, pencil poised and still. They had been assembled with courtesy rather than command. Lady Constance Fairfax in the royal box, where she sat very straight beneath the Fairfax crest, her profile composed. Madame Petrova in an aisle seat 3 rows back, hands folded, eyes keen under their dark lids. Geoffrey Tremaine standing with ecclesiastical composure at the back of the stalls. Rosalind Carey at the edge of the prompt corner, where Miss Fortescue's small figure could be seen, correct as a portrait, at her post. Mr. Finch, the head engineer, waited near the wing with a long brass key in his hand, while Mr. Briggs, the gasman, attended with nervous propriety. "If you please," Alleyn said, rising so quietly that his voice seemed a part of the house itself, "we shall try an experiment which, I hope, will offend no one's sense of decorum and will not endanger the building." He glanced toward the ghost light. "Mr. Finch, you understand our arrangement?" Mr. Finch, whose pride in the restored system had weathered the shock of its misuse, inclined his head, and moved to a discreet valve concealed behind the proscenium arch. "Only the sub-branch to the dressing-room corridor, Inspector. A touch, no more." Alleyn addressed the company as if he delivered a brief curtain speech. "We have reason to believe that Sir Nigel's death was contrived to resemble an accident. The means depended upon knowledge of this theatre's particular installation. The timing depended upon our common rituals." He paused, allowing the small words to settle. The half-hour call, the stage manager's litany, the brief dispersal of bodies from the stage to the rooms. Madame Petrova's chin lifted slightly. "You speak of timing as if of music, Inspector." "Not dissimilar, madam." He turned to Mr. Briggs. "You will recall the towel under Sir Nigel's door." Briggs, unhappy to be an actor in any scene, nodded. "Yes, sir, it was there. We keep towels about for spills." "Useful also to discourage draughts," Alleyn said, "and to confine, for a time, that which one wishes confined." He moved with unhurried exactitude to the little door in the wing that served the corridor and, with Fox's assistance, placed a folded cloth in the gap on the floor, leaving the door gently to. "We shall not, of course, introduce any danger. Mr. Finch?" A small adjustment was made. The gas flames along the wing brackets quivered, wavered, and recovered. In the auditorium, the wall lamps bent their little heads and resumed their composure. Fox, who had stationed himself near the corridor hatch, lifted a hand. "A faint odor, sir. Only a touch. Enough to show us what may be done from a distance," Alleyn said. "Mr. Finch can effect the pressure to one branch from here. A man with access to the valve, and knowledge of which regulator answers to which run of pipe, could lend support to an impression of accident in another part of the building. In the confusion of a dress rehearsal, a brief alteration might go unremarked." He let his gaze travel, affable and exact. "We have also the matter of the gland at Sir Nigel's bracket, newly greased. That is not an actor's work. The small spanner found upon his table was not the theatre's property. The gasman's cabinet has a missing key, number 4, which has not been found. Whoever used it had time, privacy, and a sound understanding of how to loosen a joint without leaving the mark of violence." "Anyone with sense could do it," Mr. Briggs protested, then faltered under Finch's mild eye. "Some sense is required," Finch observed. "More still to do it and be believed." Alleyn continued with the same unoffending calm. "You will see that much depends upon access. The dressing rooms, the engineer's cupboard, the regulator behind the proscenium, the private stair to the royal box, which communicates with the passage by the director's lobby. The substage corridors, which allow one to arrive invisibly at the prompt side. These conveniences are known intimately to certain of you and little to others." Lady Constance's fan lay closed upon the velvet rail before her. She looked down with the unignorable composure of one to whom a house, an institution, has always yielded. "Inspector," she said, "you cannot suppose that a patron concerns herself with cupboards." "I suppose nothing, your ladyship. I observe only that correspondence with the engineers mentioned precise matters of design." He addressed the house at large. The restoration insisted upon manual taps, no automatic checks, a preference for authenticity which, in this instance, made possible a very old-fashioned death. The reconstruction reached its climax as Alleyn demonstrated how the anonymous letters had been crafted to exploit Sir Nigel's psychological vulnerabilities, each quotation from Webster chosen with surgical precision to create maximum terror. The handwriting analysis, the quality of paper, the intimate knowledge of the victim's history, all pointed to someone who possessed not merely mechanical aptitude, but profound understanding of theatrical psychology. "I submit," he said gently, "that our murderer is a person who could insist upon atmosphere, command access, and borrow the theatre's own machinery for a purpose not strictly in the program." He looked up at the royal box without deference and down the aisle without disrespect. "We will not, tonight, say more." The gas flames along the walls inclined, all at once, as if a draught had entered on a cue. In that slight bow, Fox stooped and lifted something from the end seat where Alleyn had been sitting at the start. He carried it to the inspector on an open palm, an envelope of good paper, unsealed. Alleyn drew out a single slip. The ink was very black and very calm. "We are only the Stars' tennis balls, struck and banded which way please them." The quotation sat upon the stage like a placed prop. It had not been there a moment earlier. The theatre received it decently, as if the house itself understood that the scene had turned. Somewhere deep within, a door closed with excessive care. The new quiet had a different quality, as if the Lyceum, having humored the reconstruction, now waited, poised, attentive, for the true performance to begin. The royal box, with its discreet curtains and faded crimson velvet, possessed the secluded dignity of a private chapel where judgment might be rendered without disturbing the larger congregation. Below, the house lights remained lowered to ceremonial dimness, allowing the restored gas brackets along the side aisles to maintain their amber vigil, their flames reflecting softly upon gilt rails and the carved theatrical masks that had witnessed decades of performance and revelation. The ghost light held its solitary post at center stage, its frail flame asserting a quiet guardianship over boards that had seen both scripted tragedy and the more terrible drama of actual death. Inspector Alleyn stood with one hand resting lightly upon the velvet balustrade, while Detective Sergeant Fox waited with respectful solidity near a gilt chair. His document case opened with the reverence due to evidence that would shortly transform suspicion into certainty. Lady Constance Fairfax maintained her position in the royal box with the composed authority that her breeding demanded, though the morning light filtering through tall windows revealed subtle signs of strain that evening's gaslight had previously concealed. Her gloved hands remained folded with aristocratic precision, while the Fairfax crest above her head lent heraldic propriety to what had become an interrogation conducted with all the courtesy that class and circumstance required. Madame Petrova occupied an aisle seat in the stalls, her dark eyes watchful as a predator rendered temporarily still, while Geoffrey Tremaine maintained his position in the shadows of the back row, his distinguished profile bearing the weight of accumulated theatrical wisdom. "Your ladyship," Alleyn began with a courtesy that never deserted him even in moments of accusation, "we have established through our investigations that Sir Nigel's death required intimate knowledge of both the theatre's technical systems and the psychological vulnerabilities of its inhabitants. The restoration of the gaslight fixtures, undertaken at your specific insistence, created the perfect conditions for what was intended to appear as tragic accident." Fox produced a leather portfolio with ecclesiastical care, revealing correspondence that bore the Fairfax letterhead and demonstrated an unusual degree of technical interest for a theatrical patron. "These letters to Mr. Finch specify the maintenance of manual operation without modern safety devices," Alleyn continued, his voice maintaining its gentle authority. The insistence upon period authenticity served a purpose beyond historical accuracy. It ensured that the system could be manipulated by one possessing the necessary knowledge and access. The small brass key that Fox next produced, wrapped in fine linen, bore the number 4 and the distinctive markings of the theatre's original fittings. "Found beneath the removable footrest in this very box," Alleyn observed, "this key disappeared from the gasman's cabinet on the evening of the dress rehearsal. Its recovery suggests someone with both opportunity and intimate knowledge of the box's construction." Lady Constance's response came with the measured dignity that had served her through decades of social prominence. "One cannot be held responsible for objects placed where one sits, Inspector. The theatre receives many visitors, and articles are frequently mislaid." "Indeed," Alleyn agreed with perfect courtesy. "Yet the private stair to your box communicates directly with the director's lobby, and thence to the very valve system that controls pressure throughout the building. It is a convenience known to few and accessible to fewer still." He paused, allowing the implication to settle like dust in the amber-lit air. The correspondence reveals not merely an interest in authenticity, but a comprehensive understanding of how the restored system might be made to serve purposes not strictly theatrical. The revelation of Eleanor Vance's connection emerged with the careful precision of a master craftsman revealing the mechanism of a complex timepiece. Miss Fortescue's preserved records, the anonymous letters crafted on paper bearing the Fairfax watermark, the systematic campaign of psychological intimidation, all pointed to someone who possessed not merely technical expertise, but profound understanding of theatrical psychology and the vulnerabilities of those who live their lives in the public eye. The young woman's career was destroyed to protect a family's reputation, Alleyn continued with gentle inexorability. Sir Nigel retained certain documents from that period, documents that recently became the foundation for demands that grew increasingly difficult to satisfy. The Gaslight system provided both the means and the cover for a justice that operated outside conventional law. Lady Constance listened to the accumulating evidence with the composure of one who had always expected this moment, her aristocratic training serving her even as the case against her was methodically constructed. When she finally spoke, her voice retained its cultivated authority despite the circumstances closing around her. "Inspector, you have been most thorough in your investigations. I trust you understand that some obligations transcend the merely legal." The admission, delivered with aristocratic understatement, fell into the theatre's listening silence as Lady Constance removed one glove with deliberate care, as if preparing for a different sort of performance. Her hands, revealed beneath the fine leather, showed the faintest tremor. The only outward sign of the psychological storm that raged beneath her maintained composure. As Fox moved forward with the quiet efficiency that characterized his profession, the gas flames along the walls gave a single, concerted flutter before recovering their steady burn. Somewhere in the building's depths, a door closed with excessive care, and the theater settled into a new quiet that acknowledged the completion of a drama that had begun decades earlier with another young woman's destroyed dreams. The Lyceum, having served as both stage and witness to this delayed justice, resumed its eternal vigil with the faintest trace of lavender water lingering in the amber-scented air, a final aristocratic signature upon a performance that would never be repeated. The Lyceum Theatre had settled into that peculiar tranquility which follows the resolution of great disturbance, its Victorian dignity restored like a gentleman's composure after an unfortunate scene has been quietly managed. The gaslight fixtures burned with their accustomed steadiness along the corridors, their amber flames once again serving illumination rather than concealment, while the ghost light maintained its solitary vigil at center stage with renewed purpose. The air, purged of coal gas and menace, had resumed its familiar perfume of dust, size, and old velvet, though the faintest trace of lavender water seemed to linger in certain corners, a reminder of aristocratic presence that would fade but never be entirely forgotten. In the green room, where horsehair sofas and framed engravings of celebrated productions created an atmosphere of enduring tradition, the surviving members of the company had gathered with the careful courtesy of mourners who must also plan a wedding. Madame Petrova stood before the mantelpiece with the quiet authority that had sustained her through decades of theatrical crises, her hands folded with monastic severity as she addressed the assembled players. "We open Thursday evening," she announced, her accent lending gravity to words that might otherwise have seemed merely professional. "Sir Nigel would have wished it so. The Duchess of Malfi will have her voice, and we shall speak Webster's lines as if they have never been spoken before." Her decision to proceed had been received with the mixture of relief and apprehension that characterizes theatrical folk when confronted with the need to transform tragedy into art. But the company had rallied with the professional dedication that distinguishes those who serve the theatre from mere amateurs. Geoffrey Tremaine, freed from the shadow of suspicion that had briefly clouded his distinguished career, spoke with the measured delivery that had served him well through decades of observing human nature from the unique vantage point of the stage. "The theatre endures," he observed to Inspector Alleyn during a quiet moment, "because it transforms human experience into something larger than individual suffering." Lady Constance understood this, in her way. She created a drama worthy of Webster himself, though she chose to stage it in life rather than upon the boards. His words carried the philosophical weight of one who had spent a lifetime watching the intersection of performance and reality, finding in both the same fundamental patterns of ambition, betrayal, and ultimate judgment. Miss Fortescue emerged from her prompt corner sanctuary, carrying a leather portfolio that would join the theatre's permanent archives, her 40 years of faithful service having earned her the right to serve as keeper of institutional memory. "The correspondence and documents have been properly filed," she reported to Alleyn with the satisfaction of one who had served both justice and historical accuracy. "Future scholars may find them instructive regarding the relationship between theatrical patronage and personal vengeance. One learns in this profession that the most compelling dramas often occur in the wings rather than upon the stage itself." Mr. Finch appeared with the quiet pride of a craftsman whose work had been vindicated despite its temporary misuse, leading Alleyn to examine a newly installed safety device beside the main gas valve. "A pressure regulator with automatic shutoff," he explained with professional satisfaction, "maintains the period character while preventing any future misadventure. The system will serve beauty and tradition without becoming complicit in darker purposes." His modifications represented the practical resolution that allowed the theatre to retain its atmospheric authenticity while ensuring that technical knowledge could never again be weaponized with such deadly precision. Inspector Alleyn found himself once more in Sir Nigel's former dressing room, now scrubbed clean and prepared for its next occupant, the gaslight fixture above the mirror burning with steady innocence. Detective Sergeant Fox joined him with his customary solidity, closing his notebook with the satisfaction of duty completed. "A curious case, sir," Fox observed, "using the building like a stage set and the people like actors in her own play. Makes you wonder how many other dramas are being performed in places like this, with the audience none the wiser." "Indeed, Fox," Alleyn replied, his gaze moving from the mirror to the window that looked out upon the London evening. Lady Constance possessed the theatrical sensibilities necessary to stage the perfect crime, understanding timing, atmosphere, and psychological effect with the precision of a master director. Her only miscalculation was to believe that such an elaborate performance could escape its critics indefinitely. Justice, like great theatre, requires both careful preparation and flawless execution, but unlike theatrical performance, it offers no opportunity for revision or encore. As they prepared to leave, Alleyn paused beside the prompt corner where Miss Fortescue was arranging her materials for the evening's performance. Among the usual theatrical detritus, programs, cue sheets, and annotated scripts lay a small, yellowed photograph that had apparently fallen from one of the archived folders. The image showed a young woman of ethereal beauty, her eyes holding the luminous quality that belongs to those destined for either triumph or tragedy. On the reverse, in a careful hand that time had faded but not obscured, someone had written, "Eleanor Vance, the Duchess, 1923. Cover her face, mine eyes dazzle. She died young." Miss Fortescue noticed his attention and spoke quietly. "She would have been magnificent in the role, Inspector. Lady Constance saw to it that she never had the chance. Perhaps, in some way, Thursday's performance will serve as the memorial she was never permitted." She placed the photograph carefully between the pages of her prompt book, where it would rest among the theatre's accumulated memories. The Lyceum Theatre had survived another chapter in its long history, emerging with its essential character strengthened rather than diminished by the dark drama it had witnessed. As Alleyn and Fox walked up the aisle toward the brass-handled doors, the gaslight fixtures along the walls gave their customary evening flutter, Not the ominous wavering that had marked the nights of terror, but the gentle acknowledgement of day's end that belonged to their proper function. Behind them, the ghost light maintained its faithful watch over boards that would soon echo with Webster's immortal words, while somewhere in the building's depths, a door closed with the soft finality that belongs to stories properly concluded. The theater settled into its nighttime quiet, with the deep contentment of an institution that had served justice as well as art. Its restored fixtures casting their amber benediction over a world where performance and reality had briefly merged, leaving behind only the eternal truths that great drama seeks to illuminate and the gentle flames that would continue their ancient dance long after the particular sorrows of this season had faded into the accumulated wisdom of the stage. Wisdom of the stage, 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 wisdom of the stage.